Once upon a time, there was a girl locked in a tower by a witch. She fell in love with a prince who visited her secretly. But the witch, as witches always will, discovered them and put the prince to his death as he climbed up the tower to meet his love. The briar roses that surrounded the tower had also fallen in love with the prince and enfolded him in their thorny, piercing embrace as he screamed. In the end, the girl defeated the witch on her own and escaped, and searched the world for her prince. At last he found him, a poor blind beggar unable to return to his kingdom, and wept for his suffering. Her tears fell like a gentle healing rain into his torn eyes. For a few moments after entering the sudden gloom of the bookshop, all Rue could see was darkness. Even when her eyes had adjusted to the dim light from the windows, covered over by stacks of books, all could she make out Arthur, who was right beside her, where the gleam of his glasses and the light smuds of not darkness created by the white of his school uniform. An unnatural murkiness hung over the room, and a dark, insidious smoke hovered in the corners. "Is anyone there?" she called out. Only a feeble, indistinct moan answered her. Rue looked at Arthur in alarm. "It sounded like it came from the back room." They wound their way through the maze of bookshelves and found a small door tucked away between towering bookcases. Within was a small room with one small window slightly open. The rest of the room crowded with books, and a small fireplace with a dying fire in the far wall, and a series of curious figurines hunched in a circle. They did not move. At last Rue approached them cautiously, with the weak light glanced by fire. She could make out the face of an old man as he huddled in a chair. She snatched her hand back in surprise, almost as soon as she touched his shoulder. He's made of stone," she whispered. Arthur, who stood transfixed in the doorway until then, made his way around the circle. "Statues all," he marveled. "This is no time to be admiring handiwork," Ruth snapped back at him out of fear and dread. "We had to find out where the noise—" She saw one figure slumped in the corner beside the fireplace, the gloom hiding him from immediate view. She knelt beside him to find an old man, half stone, half flesh. He drew rasping breath. The story." Rue listened in horror, her face paling. "What have you done?" There were no cracks in Duck's heart to catch the sword and to stop it from drawing blood. Heart shards mingled with a shimmering spray of blood, and all seemed to hang in the air a moment before falling, as if held by the power of Fakir's desperate regret. What have I done? But he was too numb for thought. Each glistening drop of her blood, each sparkling splinter of her heart, the strangled cry of agony that caught in her throat, the blue of her eyes gazing over in pain, all stabbed him with bone-chilling horror. "No," he whispered as he caught her limp falling body. Then, like a searing pain, as if the fragments of his heart still left in his body, it splintered along with the pendant. Like chips of broken glass were trying to pull their way out of his chest. His scream was torn out of him. "No!" As if a frightened part of him hoped that with one word could turn back time and undo the nightmare he had wrought with his own hands. This was what his twisted heart had given birth to. The prince and the raven both emerged from Drosselmeyer, good as well as evil. But evil alone seemed to reside in Fakir's own heart. "Duck!" He cradled her small form in his arms, but her eyelids were falling. Her breathing shallow as the pool of blood around her grew, and he was left holding a pile of bloodied, crumpled tulle in the small, frail body of a yellow duck. Her feathers stained crimson, and in the slick of her own heart's blood. A wound that would have been dangerous to a girl would be fatal to a duck. Anger and sorrow and terror ran a jagged path through his veins. All he knew how to feel was pain. Fate had come full circle. It could not be escaped. He was the knight torn in two. He was certain from the wrenching in his heart. He was the ghost knight who had blindly cut down his own lover. Was there no escape? Mythos. He turned with pain-stunned eyes to the prince who had watched frozen, unable to change the tragedy playing out before him. "Your sword." And raising his left hand to his heart, even as his right arm cradled Duck's limp body, Fakir bowed his head. "I beg you." The prince hesitated. For before him knelt the youth who had sworn to be his knight when he was but a child, the one who had striven to protect him when he had been heartless and helpless, and when he had been corrupted and raven enough to attack innocents. The bond of fealty and friendship tied them together. Mithras' raving heart had been able to force him to attack and fight when he Fakir to be yet another incarnation of the monster raven that seemed to bedevil him. But he could not raise his blade against his friend, seeing him broken and grief-stricken, so human before him. Mythos did not know what to do. To grant his friend's last request and take his life, or make him take hold of his life with his unwilling hands when it seemed all reason had fled. Was this choice the penance he had to pay for all the harm he had unwillingly wreaked while heartless and foul-hearted? At last, Mythos raised his blade reluctantly, light like his heart, wavering on its very edge. Fakir did not shake his head. Weary resignation etched in every line of his body as he waited, and wished for the sword to fall. He wanted to weep. He was back exactly where he was before the entire mess started. Duck was not beside him, and his life meaningless, now worse than meaningless. But he knew he was no longer capable of tears. In that moment, like the answer to a dream, Princess Tutu appeared. The faint red glow cast by the blood that shone so brilliantly in the light sunlight, and the heart shards that glittered within it like a discarded treasure coalesced into Duck, into Princess Tutu. Not the Princess Tutu called out by Mythos' heart, the elegant human princess, but Princess Tutu, shaped from the very core of Duck's being, who had faced the monster raven in that final battle. The duck-like princess who had swan wings in the place of arms, and possessed enough hope to lighten the darkest despair. But there was no pendant around her neck, so she transformed from the power of her own heart. Her figure was faint and wispy and translucent, but undeniably Duck as she reached out with distressed feathered arms, tears glistening in her eyes. "No, you can't." It was unclear who she was pleading with, Fakir or Mythos. The sound of her voice, Fakir's head jerked upward, to find himself surrounded by sparkling red, so warm and lovely, he's certain he must be within Duck's heart, for no other place could be so heartbreakingly beautiful. The glowing red image of Duck reached out toward him with both wings, covering his face with feathers. But her touch was elusive, like the caress of a wind on his skin, so intense. It was as if he had never existed in the first place, and when he reached out to grasp her feathered shoulders, his hands passed through her entirely. There was nothing for him to do but weep and dance. And so they danced, a pas de deux without touch, a dance that Fakir hoped would never end, for this was all that fate allowed him. They promenaded, but he was still the useless knight he had always been. His hand on her waist did not support her as it should, and he knew that he was no fit partner for her, that she was beyond his touch. But he would not draw away. So the ache and tremble in his chest as he realized that he grasped air when he tried to lift her, she must jump on her own power. At this, the tears was no longer capable of burned in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks unneeded. The dark, broken pieces of glass that were still lodged in his chest melted, tears like full melting silver from his eyes, as the frozen gray within them thawing back into the green. The glow of Fakir's heart shards surrounded the two of them, and all the emotions he had not felt for weeks came rushing back to him. Guilt consumed him and despair for what he had mercilessly done to Duck and to countless others as the darkest night. There was nothing for him to do but weep and dance. It was wrong. It was a lie, he said as he felt the memory of her touch once more as he curved her body backwards within the useless circle of his arms. When I told you to let go of Drosselmeyer's story, and return to your true self, that the real you is a duck just because at the time Mythos' heart was what gave you human form. The real you is as human as your heart, much more human than I am. Kindness and hope overflow from your heart, and only a killing, monstrous despair from mine. Fakir, Duck answered softly, covering her wings upward, his arms shallowing and surrounding hers. She minded no words to him, with her ballet he spoke. Ever since you gave it to me, I've carried your heart with me. I carried it in my heart. I was never without it. Anywhere I went, you went, with me. Whatever was done, but he only me it was your doing too. I know kindness is in your heart and what love. So won't you forgive yourself? She gestured towards her chest and then towards her own, cupping her wingtips as she cradled something of infinite value within them. He stared at her, startled, and at last whispered, "How is it you are beside me? I fear no fate. I want no world. Is it that you are my fate, my world? That you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing is you?" He mimed a heartfelt emotion, his left palm on his heart with the fingers of his right hand beating into the back of the left, and reached out towards her, but his arms halted before he could finish the movement, and instead withered into sorrow. All the joy and hope mined earlier were consumed in despair. All these things were never meant for me. Heavy-hearted, he watched her dance. Hers was no longer the elegant, flawless ballet of the fairy tale ballerina. With her duck-like wings, her movements, her miming were no longer precise, as perfect. And yet her dancing overflowed as much as ever with her heart, with herself. We'll help them together, Pete and the others. This time, I promise to always stay by your side, Duck vowed, though she could not raise 2 fingers above her head in promise. She curved her wing above her, and he could read the sincerity of her intent in every line of her body. And yet sincerity, he knew, was not enough. How? How will you keep such an impossible promise? I tried. I tried going against your fate and mine, and look what I have wrought. Self-mockery tinged his voice and his body language as he gestured her insubstantial figure as he pirouetted before him. Her only response was a smile, and at last he said through mine the words he wanted to before all this grief had overtaken them. You could give your heart to me, then I could give mine to you. Fakir's eyes widened in disbelief, for what he had grasped for, even as a child, had always been out of his reach. Idiot, do you even know what you're saying? He whispered, unable to believe the meaning of her dance. And even as his voice was exasperated and incredulous, there was a touch of desperation to it, and Duck thought, yes, the oak tree was right. This is all of who Fakir really is. This is the Fakir I missed and longed for all these lonely weeks. The one who tries to fix all the problems on his own, always wanting to solve everything by himself, always forgiving the faults of those he loved, but never his own. Those he loved. Duck's movement slowed, a small gasp of sudden realization escaping her. Somehow, in that instant, she finally grasped with startling clarity at just why he had written the story he had for her. I wondered how she could have failed to see its meaning until now. She looked up, busy at Albaresque, but Fakir's eyes refused to meet hers, as if seeing would be disbelieving, and everything would unravel as nothing more than a wonderful dream before his eyes. Duck fluttered to his side on point, opened her feathered arms and encircled Fakir's shoulders as he bowed his head in hopelessness. Yes, she mimicked with a nod of her head. Yes, now I do. She closed her eyes and leaned against his chest. Although she was intangible as a wisp of a dream, her touch no more than a breath of breeze on his skin. Fakir felt the enveloping warmth of her embrace course through his limbs and into his frozen, fractured heart. He did not care that her touch would only be a memory. Fakir raised his arms and cradled her luminous, airy form against his heart. Opening her eyes, Duck studied his face a moment. His eyes closed, and the forgotten track of tears drying on his face. She tilted her head upward and closed the distance between them, kissing his tears and tasting the bitterness of them. He felt as if he had found out the deepest secret nobody knows. The root of the root and the bud of the bud and the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than the soul or hope can hide. And no wonder that's keeping the stars apart. Together they called the dance hope, love. They moved through the coda of the pas de deux. Will you let me carry your heart then? He asked. And my heart, since I've already given you mine, forever. She pressed him one more time with her insubstantial feathered arms and smiled. Yes. The blood and heart shards beneath their feet mingled and came together, like interlocking stones of the jeweled courage, and then emitted a blinding flash of light. For one frantic moment, Fakir wondered if Duck had vanished, but the two of them had merely returned to the side of the lake. both the transformations of the darkest night and Princess Tutu having undone themselves. But then there was no more time for idle thought as Duck lay before him, still bleeding. He frantically stripped off the coat and shirt of his school uniform, covering her body with the blue jacket and staunchly trying to staunch her chest wound with the fabric of his shirt. Mythos was surprised and wondered as Fakir danced with a large white bird. It's a swan! The two of them, surrounded by soft red light, seeing anything more than vague outlines difficult. Then the light had flared brilliantly when his dazzled eyes could see again. He found Fakir clutching a bleeding, barely conscious Duck to his chest. Fakir, as he murmured. Are you okay? Shh, don't talk. She's alive? Barely, Fakir answered tersely. As the two of them hurried Duck into the town hospital, neither noticed the statue of a girl who sat propped against a tree looked blindly on. A Fledsley raven perched on her marble head.